Hello, I'm Joel Kramer, and I'm an archaeology student here in Israel.
How are you so crazy about me? You gave your life to set me free. By your grace that I had never known, I am saved, my life is yours alone. La da 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 da, la da 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 da, la da 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 da, la da 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 da. I was just thinking to myself, am I saved? Where would I go if I were to die today? Could you help me know the truth?
So what you're stuck with is trying to find an excavation that happened a very long time ago that was reburied. It's not easy. So we have this plan from the excavations of Bethel in 1934. Okay, and this on their plan is all their excavations took place around the building that they used as a dig headquarters. So if you look at it, it's a two-story building. This middle story right here shows that it's a two-story building. There it is right there, two-story building. Coming off the front of that building is a little courtyard area with a gate in it. Do you see it? Right there. Right next to that is another old building that was there at the time in 1934. It's right here. So do you see it?
Yeah. There we are.
And what's pretty cool, I don't think we should go in there necessarily, but when you go into that room, there's an old chest in there, which the locals have told me that that's from the time of excavation. So we're talking about William Foxwell Albright, the father of biblical archaeology. The chest that he used is sitting in the basement of the headquarters for the dig. I think that's pretty cool. But anyways, it's just sitting in there rotting. So now we're going to walk out around the corner and we're going to walk over. Now, since we know where these headquarter buildings are, now we know exactly where they dug because we can go off of these buildings. So you can see the dig headquarters building, right, that we just came from. And then down here you can see a piece of archaeology that was found in Albright's excavations. That is from, that actually is pictured in his excavation report. And he thought it was a dye vat, but we know now that those are olive presses for making olive oil. And it's specifically from the early Iron Age, which, or from the Iron Age period, Iron Age 2, which is the time of Jeroboam. And remember that the biblical account for Bethel is that when the kingdom divides between the north kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, that the first king of the northern kingdom is Jeroboam, and he doesn't want the Israelites, the 10 northern tribes, to go back to the temple and worship there. So he sets up his own religion, and he sets up a worship place in the far north at Dan, and in the far south of the northern kingdom here at Bethel. That olive press found by Albright is from that period. And look, it's just sitting in somebody's yard now. Those houses. And then do you see that these are the two areas that we're looking at that were excavated? The city wall goes by this area, which you can see right here. Can't see any part of the city wall. So these are those areas and excavated. They're late bronze. Late bronze. Late bronze is the time of the biblical chronology of Joshua's conquest, what we're talking about over on the tell that we were just at. Now look at the pictures that were taken right in this area. These are all from this area. Look at this, what was found. One picture. Here's the gate. The gate was found over on the north side over here. Look at the size of the gate. Okay, look at the depth that they went to. Okay, all this substantial archaeology, structures. Look at this gate. Look at that size of that sucker. And you can't see any of it anymore. All you can see is a field. They made this road and paved it, which cuts over the top of the city wall and so on and so forth. So our anchor point, which everybody agrees with, that this is Bethel, you can't see anything. And one of the most important cities in the Bible. Now, we have to keep this in mind, though, that the ancient name of this site is Luz, which is almond, means almond, right? And so the biblical events that take place at Bethel don't actually take place in the city, because we're talking about the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and so at this time they're nomadic and they're staying near cities, but not in cities. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So now we need to try to figure out where they're staying, and that's where we're going to go next. So we're going to go to the biblical place for Bethel. Now later, the city becomes known as Bethel, this city, and is called Bethel. But at the time of the patriarchs, this was the Canaanite name for the city, Almond. And they're camping somewhere near the city, not in the city. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So how do we know where this is? Archaeologically, when we're looking for an authentic place, what you want to try to find is one thing built on top of another. One thing from one period stacked on top of another. And so we're going to go to where archaeologists found that you can't see anymore, but you get it. It's here. Now look at the minaret from the mosque. Okay? And so get your bearings. Again, we're just to the north of the mosque, just like we were just to the north at Bethel from the radio tower. So this is our actual important place. Now I want to give you some context before I just read to you out of the Bible. First of all, let's get our bearings straight. This is north, south, east, west. And this is Ramallah over here. Okay. Where is I?
Beyond there.
Okay, you see our radio tower, and it's not just straight behind it. It's right behind those houses that are just to the left of the radio tower. You see that? Mm-hmm. Now where is Bethel? You see our minaret, and remember the city comes all the way through this whole area. So all of that over there is ancient Bethel. Okay? This that we're standing on is an archaeological site which actually is being dug currently every year by a Japanese group. And so what we have here is what we're looking for. We have one thing on top of another thing. Right now you're standing on a Crusader tower from the Crusader period, which starts around 1099. Okay, so that's not all that important, but it's not just the tower. It's sitting on a very early 4th century AD Byzantine church. And you can see that building structure. That's the entrance over here to our west. You can see where they've been digging. And then look how big it is. Do you see the wall of it coming down through here? Goes all the way out there. You can see where they've been digging. It's a big, massive Byzantine church from the 4th century. We know exactly about it because Jerome, who was here and wrote about it, this church is in use when he writes about it. Okay, and so he's also from towards the end of the 4th century and into the beginning of the 5th century. Below the church, also, other remains have been discovered. This was excavated back when Bethel was being excavated by Albright and Kelso, and so and they're also starting to get into some of that in their excavations. And so, underneath the Byzantine church, we have earlier remains from the Iron Age period, and from the Middle Bronze, and from the Early Bronze. From the Early Bronze and Middle Bronze, we don't have any kind of structure or architecture, but we have pottery that shows that the site was in use at the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, okay? So it's one thing built on top of another. If you measure time with ancient texts, you look at the one and then the older one and the older one, we kind of think this way back in time on timelines and with ancient texts, right? With archaeology, you think back in time going this way. How far back archaeologically does this site that we're standing on go? It goes all the way back to the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob with pottery sherds. Okay, now we've got all of our bearings straight. We've been everywhere. We've stood everywhere. Now all I have to do is read you the biblical text, and you're going to get it. Here we go. Chapter 12 of Genesis. Chapter 12 is not very far into the biblical account, is it? I'll start out in verse 6. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. We'll be at Shechem a different day, but that's the first place that Abram is mentioned in this land. At the time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And the Lord there is Yahweh specifically. Okay? Now Yahweh is important because names for God like El or Elohim, especially El, are also, it's a Semitic name meaning God, but it's found in Canaanite too. We're not talking about the same God, just like Mormons believe in Jesus and Christians believe in Jesus, but it's not the same Jesus. The El of the Canaanites is not the same as the God El of the Hebrews. Do you understand that? But the same word is used. However, Yahweh is only found with the Israelites. Does that make sense? Not outside. Therefore, it's a very distinctive name. And who is Abraham building an altar to? To Yahweh. Okay, now listen to this. This is verse 8. From there, that is from Shechem, which is north of us here. From there, he went on toward the hills east of Bethel. So where is he? He's in the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west, point to it, and Ai on the east.
So in between.
I want you to really get it, so I'm going to read that again. From there, he went on toward the hills east of Bethel. He's coming this way, east of Bethel, and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west, point to Bethel, and Ai on the east. We're looking for one thing built on top of another, where Abraham pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. Where is that place? Do you see that I'm not making this stuff up? It's as real as the nose on your face. Okay, Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to Yahweh and called on the name of Yahweh. You can tell when Yahweh is used in your Bibles because it's Lord with all capital letters. Then Abram set out and continued to the Negev. Okay, so we go to chapter 13 now. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, so now he's coming back this other way with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place. He's a nomad. He went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." This is answering your question that you had before. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered like the garden of the Lord. So point to the Jordan Valley. You can actually see it right through that gap. If it was a clear day, you can actually see the green strip from the Jordan that cuts right through the valley from here. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt towards Zor. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. So Lot heads that way. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, who stayed here, Lot had parted from him, lift up your eyes, and from where you are, and look north, north and south, south, east, and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Let me read one more important thing that happens here. Genesis 28. Jacob's dream at Bethel. Now again, we're talking about nomads. We're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're going to see it at Shechem too. Is when they're talking about a city, they're not talking about inside the walls of the city, right? They're talking about in the local area of that city. Jacob's dream at Bethel, chapter 28, verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. So you know where Beersheba is. You were there yesterday. And if you come from there and get up on the mountain ridge, then you come right along the mountain ridge, all through this area, all the way up into Shechem. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land of which you are lying, on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All people on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. You know who that's talking about, right? That's what the church is doing here, is the ultimate fulfillment of that. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Okay, so now let's talk about the identification of this site. That when this site was first identified, I said was Edward Robinson. Actually, that's not true. This site was identified way before Edward Robinson in the 4th century AD by Eusebius of Caesarea. Now, Eusebius went looking for the biblical cities right after 324 AD because that's when Constantine won the battle against his arch rival Licinius, and he took the east portion of the empire as well as the west. A great persecution was happening to the Christians up until 324 when he took the east, and that ended that persecution. You couldn't build big churches until that victory. Do you see what I'm saying? So when you're excavating big churches, you're not going to find big churches built in this area before 324. So Eusebius is going around looking for the places, and he's looking for the place of Bethel and Ai. He's looking roughly 12 miles to the north of Jerusalem, and he needs to find, he knows, he needs to find two cities that are directly next to each other, west and east of each other, right, with another place in the middle, which is the biblical, most important biblical pinpoint. He comes and he identifies the place. Then a church is built here to commemorate the place over the archaeology that would have existed at that time. Then Jerome is translating all of this from Greek into Latin a little bit later. And at that time, this church is already built and functioning. And they describe what Bethel looks like, that it's already lived in the 4th century AD. People are living on the ancient site of Bethel and have houses. And Ai, to its east, is in ruins. And then Edward Robinson comes here, makes a connection with Beitty, the Arabic, and the name preservation and where the roads come together. See what I'm saying? This is not a mystery. This is obvious. Everything is simple if you just take the Bible's word for it. If you take God's word for it, you move forward, you understand. If you don't, and you bury your face in all of the scholarly debate about these places that's been going on for 200 years, you will be thoroughly confused and you won't know up from down, right from left. History leaves its mark. This was a sacred place. This was a place that was commemorated by many different people in many different time periods. That's why you have one thing built on top of another. It's like a big arrow coming down from heaven saying, this is what the Bible's talking about. This is the place. Why throw the Bible out the window and therefore all of this reality? That's just confusing. Yeah.
Did I hear you right, Joel, that this is where Jacob had his dream of the ladder writing?
Yes. The understanding is, remember, it's the same. When God says to Abraham, look north, south, east, west, I'm giving this land to you. When he does that for Jacob, it's when Jacob is fleeing and he comes to the area of Bethel, and then the same thing. God is passing that baton, that promise, that inheritance on to Jacob. And the assumption is that he's in the same place that his grandfather camped, and probably his father camped, that he was familiar with, that's not in Bethel itself, but outside, and that this is where he had this dream.
That rock.